You're about to hear 4 disturbing stories from secret society members. Story 1. The Third Room. Elliot joined the Fraternal Order at 26. He was invited by a colleague at the firm where he worked, a man named Gerald. Older, well-regarded. The kind of man people trusted without fully knowing why. They had worked together for 3 years before Gerald mentioned the order, casually, over a late dinner after a long week, like it had just occurred to him. Gerald had been a member for 11 years. He said the order was philanthropic at its core, business connections, yes, but genuine charitable work. Community investment, real money going to real causes, the kind of network that opened doors before you ever had to knock. Elliot was not naive. He understood that organizations like this existed, that access required access, that the dues bought more than dinner. He wasn't bothered by that logic. He applied. He was accepted within the month. He received a letter, handwritten, on heavy cream paper, with a wax seal he did not recognize. He kept it. The induction ceremony was formal but unremarkable. A robe, a candle, spoken pledges in a wood-paneled room that smelled of old books and cigar smoke. 32 men present, not counting himself. None of them looking at him with anything other than polite welcome. He had expected something more theatrical. He was almost disappointed by how ordinary it felt. The lodge met every second Thursday. A large Victorian building in the older financial district. Brass plate by the door, 1887. Nothing hidden. For the first several months, it was exactly what Gerald had described. Dinners, guest speakers, charitable committee work. Men in their 40s and 50s talking about golf and estate planning. Elliot began to wonder why anyone bothered with the rituals at all. Then, in his 7th month, a senior member named Douglas approached him after a meeting. Quietly, he said Elliot had been well regarded by the membership. He said there was an additional level of participation available. For those who had demonstrated commitment, Elliot said yes without hesitating. The following Thursday, instead of entering the main hall, he was guided to a different entrance, around the side of the building, a narrower door set slightly back from the street. He had walked past it a dozen times without registering it. No handle on the outside, just a keypad. Douglas entered a code without shielding it, inside a staircase leading down. Elliot followed Douglas down 2 flights. The building, from the outside, appeared to have no basement at all. He had stood outside this building on a clear afternoon once and looked at it properly. 4 stories, no visible lower level. He noted this as they descended. He said nothing. They passed through a corridor. Stone walls, old stone. Not poured concrete, not modern construction. Something much older than the building above. The air changed as they walked, cooler, drier. The smell of something that had been undisturbed for a long time. They stopped at a door. Douglas said this was the 2nd room. He said the 2nd room was where the real work of the order happened. The philanthropy, the charitable investment. More serious than what happened upstairs, more private, Elliot understood. He entered, a long table. 14 men he recognized from the Thursday meetings. Ledgers, legal documents. A map on the wall of the city with parcels marked in red. Land acquisitions, it turned out. Property held collectively by the order. Significant holdings, managed quietly. The 2nd room met monthly. Elliot was given a portfolio to review between meetings. He felt the mild thrill of being trusted with something real. That thrill lasted about 3 months, until one Thursday when Douglas asked him to stay after the 2nd room meeting had concluded. Quietly, the way he had asked before. He said Elliot had been exceptional. He paused, then he said, there was a 3rd room. Elliot told me the phrasing stayed with him. Not a 3rd level, not a 3rd tier, a 3rd room. He followed Douglas further down the same corridor. Another door, another descent, this time a short one. 4 steps. The door was different from the others. Older, the wood was darker and had a texture to it that Elliot couldn't identify. Douglas opened it without ceremony. Inside was a single long table. 6 men Elliot did not recognize from any of the upstairs meetings. Men he had never seen before. They were older, all of them. significantly older than anyone in either of the other rooms. They did not greet him. They looked at him. That was all. Douglas closed the door behind them and indicated Elliot should sit. He sat. He said what followed was the most disorienting 40 minutes of his life. Not because of anything overtly frightening, but because of what was discussed. He will not tell me. He has never told anyone. He says it wasn't illegal. He says it wasn't immoral. Not in any obvious sense. He says it was simply information. Information he had not expected to exist, about systems he had assumed worked the way most people assumed they worked. They didn't. They had not apparently ever worked that way. For a very long time, the men in that room had known this, had known it in some cases for decades. He walked out of the building that night feeling like the floor of the world was made of something different from what he'd always believed. He resigned from the order within the month. He did not give a reason. He said Douglas accepted his resignation without surprise, without any attempt to persuade him to stay, without any question about why. Just a brief phone call, warm but efficient, a final letter arriving later that week confirming his resignation and thanking him for his participation, which Elliot told me was almost the most unsettling part. He said it told him that people leaving the third room wasn't unusual, that they had seen it before, that they expected it. He said Douglas walked him to the side door personally, opened it, said goodnight, no drama, no warning, no request to keep anything confidential, as if confidence wasn't even a concern, as if what he had heard was too large to be repeated in any way that would matter. He said he has thought about those 6 men many times since, how old they were, how the room smelled. Old paper, a silence that had settled in over many years, how they looked at him when he walked in. Not with hostility, more like recognition. Like they had been waiting for a specific person and he had turned out to be that person. He said the thing he cannot shake is this. They weren't threatening, they weren't cruel. They seemed, if anything, tired. The way you'd be tired if you had been sitting in the same room, knowing the same things, for a very long time, waiting for someone to finally come down and share the weight of it. He said he thinks about going back sometimes, just to hear the rest, just to understand why those 6 men chose to stay when he chose to leave. He said he never will. He said he is fairly certain he means that. Story 2. What happened at the induction? This story comes from a woman named Vera. She joined a women's society at 31, long established, chapters in 14 cities, community work, scholarship programs, professional networking. Her mother had been a member, her grandmother. She had grown up knowing she would join eventually. The induction was a 3-day residential event, held at a large country estate about 2 hours from the city. There were 9 women inducting that year, all in their 30s, all accomplished, all with family connections to the society. The first day was pleasant. Introductions, meals together, orientation sessions about the society's history and structure. The second day was more formal, ceremony, vows, the particular rituals that had been passed down for over a century. Vera had been told about most of it in advance. Her mother had prepared her. She was not anxious. She was ready. On the second night, after the formal ceremonies had concluded, the 9 inductees were brought together in a large drawing room. High ceilings, oil portraits on the walls, women Vera didn't recognize. Members from previous generations, she assumed. Looking down at the room with expressions she found difficult to read, senior members served them tea. It was warm, comfortable. The fire was lit despite it being summer because the house ran cold at night, and it was the kind of cold that the building seemed to generate from within rather than absorb from outside. They talked for a while, the kind of talk that happened at the end of a long day. Easy, undemanding. Then one of the senior members, a woman in her 70s named Constance, asked them to sit in a circle, no chairs, on the floor, in front of the fire. Vera found this slightly unusual but not alarming. She had been told to expect the unexpected during the induction. This felt manageable. Constance remained standing. She said there was one more part of the induction, one that was never spoken of outside the walls of an induction ceremony. She said that in over 100 years, this had never been written down. never been documented in any form, not in minutes, not in letters, not in any personal record any member had ever kept. She said it had been passed from member to member, by voice, this way since the founding. She asked the 9 women to close their eyes. She said she was going to tell them something. She said once they heard it, they would understand why it had never been written down. She said they were free to leave the room at any point. She said no one had ever left in all the years she had been administering this part of the ceremony, but she said the door was there, and it was unlocked. And that was that. Vera told me she almost got up. She had one hand flat on the floor beside her, ready to push herself upright. Not out of fear exactly, more a sudden, instinctive feeling. She was at a threshold. The person who walked back out through that door would be the same person who had walked in, and the person who stayed might not be. She said she sat with that feeling for a moment, feeling the floor beneath her, the warmth of the fire against her face, the stillness of 8 other women doing exactly what she was doing, making the same decision in the same breath. She stayed. She will not tell me what Constance said. She said it wasn't a secret in the way a password was a secret. She said it was more like a perspective, a way of understanding something she had been looking at her whole life without seeing correctly. She said once Constance gave her that frame, she couldn't remove it. She said she tried, for a while, to go back to seeing things the old way. She couldn't. She said it wasn't unpleasant. It wasn't frightening. It was just permanently different, like being shown something that, once seen, could not be unseen. She said all 9 of them sat with their eyes closed for a long time after Constance finished. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Eventually, someone opened her eyes. Then another, one by one, until all 9 of them were looking at each other in the firelight. Every one of them had the same expression. She said she doesn't have a word for it. She has tried over the years, asked other members how they would describe it. Nobody has ever found the right word either. The closest she can get is the look on someone's face when they've just understood something they wish they hadn't. Except it wasn't that. Because none of them seemed to wish they hadn't. She said the society has been, in every practical way, exactly what it appeared to be. Scholarship programs, community work, professional connection. She has found it genuinely valuable. She has made genuine friendships. Some of the most honest relationships of her adult life. She does not regret joining. Not for a single day. But she told me there are moments, in quiet conversations with other long-standing members, when something Constance said will surface in the middle of otherwise ordinary talk. A reference, a look, a slight pause in the conversation that isn't quite awkward, just shared. She said it functions almost like a language within the language, something spoken between the actual words, recognizable only to people who were in that room. She said the strangest part isn't the knowledge itself, it's how ordinary everything looks from the outside, how completely the same. She said she can walk down a familiar street and see it exactly as she always saw it, and simultaneously see what she sees now, both things present at once, neither canceling the other out. She said most days she barely notices. It's just how she sees now, the way a person who learns a second language eventually stops translating in their head. It simply becomes how they understand. She said the hardest part, in the beginning, was talking to people who didn't know. Maintaining conversations that felt, from her side, like they were missing something so fundamental she couldn't believe no one had mentioned it. She got used to that too, eventually. She said it's how every member she has ever discussed it with describes it. You get used to the gap. You learn to stand in it without feeling like you're falling. She said it takes about 6 months, and then it's just your life. Story 3. The member who asked too many questions. This story was told to me by a man named Leonard. Leonard joined a private club at 38, invitation only, membership capped at 40, no waiting list. You were either invited or you were not, and if you were not, you likely never knew it existed. Annual dues significant enough that most people who could afford them didn't mention them. He had been invited by a business associate, a man he trusted. The club met quarterly. A townhouse in a quiet street near the Embassy District. No sign on the door. You either knew the address or you didn't. Leonard found the club exactly as described. stimulating conversation, the best food he had eaten at a private gathering, introductions that led to introductions that led to conversations he would simply never have had otherwise. He was, he told me, genuinely happy there for almost 2 years. He had no complaints, no misgivings. He found the secrecy mildly theatrical, but ultimately harmless. Then he started noticing things that didn't add up. Small things at first. The kind of thing you could easily explain away once or twice. The way certain members excused themselves at the same point in every quarterly gathering. Around 11 p.m., always after dinner. Always after the main conversation had moved past its peak and into the comfortable, winding down phase. A group of 7 or 8, always the same 7 or 8. He made a point, after the second time he noticed, of watching which specific members left. Always the same faces, always returning approximately 40 minutes later, unhurried, rejoining the conversation as if stepping back in from a smoke, as if nothing had happened. Leonard assumed at first it was a smoking room, a card game, something mundane. He stopped assuming that when he tried one evening to follow them, casually, the way you'd wander looking for a bathroom. He followed them to the back of the townhouse, down a hallway he hadn't been in before. They went through a door at the end. He waited in the hallway for a moment. Then he tried the door, locked. He went back to the main room. He mentioned it to no one. Over the following quarterly meetings, he began asking questions, indirect ones at first, historical questions about the club, its founding, its original membership. He found the answers oddly thin. Dates that didn't quite match, names that didn't appear in any record he could locate, a founding charter he was told existed but never managed to see. He started asking more direct questions. Specifically, he asked his original contact, the associate who had invited him, what happened during those 40-minute absences. The associate laughed. He said it was a smaller dining room, a private supper for longer-standing members. Leonard said he accepted that, but he said the answer had come too quickly, too smoothly, like something prepared in advance. At the following quarterly meeting, he excused himself at 11 p.m. before the group did. He waited near the hallway. When they moved, he followed at a distance. They went through the door. This time, he had come prepared. He had spoken to the building's previous owner through a property research firm. He knew the layout of the townhouse. He knew what was on the other side of that door. According to the original building plans he had obtained, the door led to a short corridor and then a service exit to an internal courtyard. He tried the door again. Locked, as before. He found a window at the end of the hallway that looked out onto the internal courtyard. Small window, frosted glass at the bottom, clear at the top. He had to stand on his toes to see clearly. He looked through it. The courtyard was roughly 20 feet square. Stone paving, a single iron bench. No plants, no other doors, no structures. Empty, completely empty. He stood there for a long time. He counted the people he had watched go through that door. 14, possibly 15. He had confirmed from the building plans that the courtyard had only one entrance, the door they had gone through. No gate, no connecting passage. No underground access listed in any documentation he had found. 14 or 15 people had just gone through a locked door into a space with no other exit, and the space was empty. He stood at the window for a long time. Then he went back to the main room. He sat with his drink. He smiled when spoken to. He left when it was reasonable to leave. He resigned from the club the following week. He said his contact called him, asked if everything was all right. Leonard said everything was fine. He said the dues had simply become an inconvenience at this point in his life. His contact said he understood. He said Leonard was welcome back whenever he chose. He said that in a particular way, a tone Leonard said he couldn't quite describe beyond calling it patient, like someone who knew he'd be back, like someone who had seen this before. Leonard told me he has not been back. He told me he has thought many times about what he saw, or rather what he didn't see, the empty courtyard, the people who should have been in it. He said he spent about 6 months turning it over, every angle, every possible explanation. He is by profession a methodical thinker. He does not accept gaps easily. He said he arrived at 2 theories. He will not share either of them. He said sharing them would require him to say out loud something he has decided he doesn't want to say out loud. He said the saying of it would make it more real than he is comfortable with. He said there's a version of him that could have stayed in the club and eventually found his way through that door with the others. He said he made a different choice. He says he sleeps fine, every night. He said he is, by any measure, perfectly okay. He has a good life, successful career, people he loves, things to look forward to. He said this with the particular care of someone who has decided, very deliberately, what they will and will not examine too closely. He said that's a skill, deciding what not to look at directly. He said most people just don't know they're doing it. He said he knows, and he has made his peace with that. Story 4, The Last Initiation. This is the last story, and I want to be careful with how I tell it, because the person who told it to me asked specifically that I not include anything that might identify them. Not their name, not their city, not the organization, not even the approximate decade in which this happened. I agreed to those terms. What I can tell you is this: they joined a society in early adulthood. Fewer than 30 members. Existed, they were told, for well over a century. The initiation process was lengthy, several months. Tests of character, tests of discretion, tests of commitment, all of which they passed. The final initiation was held at night, in a building they had not been to before, a large house, rural, somewhere with no visible neighbors and no sound from any road. They were driven there by an existing member, someone they had met several times at regular gatherings, a quiet person. Said almost nothing during the drive, played no music, just drove. The route took about an hour. They didn't recognize any of it. At some point, the driver stopped making turns that made directional sense. They stopped tracking. Inside, the existing membership was assembled. 22 people, arranged in a specific configuration around the room. Candles, a lot of them. The smell of something burning that was not wood. Something older than wood. Something they had never encountered before and have not since. A ceremony they had been partly briefed on and partly not. The part they had been briefed on was manageable, formal, atmospheric, a little theatrical, if they were being honest. The part they had not been briefed on happened near the end, after an hour of ceremony. After they were tired and slightly disoriented from the candlelight and the smell and the long drive to a place they couldn't locate on any map. They were asked to stand before the assembled membership. They were asked a question, one question. They told me they will not share what the question was, but they said it was not philosophical. It was not rhetorical. It was a specific question that required a specific answer, and they said they did not know the answer, which they said was clearly expected. Because the moment they said they didn't know, the room responded. 22 voices, simultaneously, the same 3 words, in a tone that was not dramatic, not theatrical, simply matter of fact, like people confirming something that had always been true. They will not tell me what the 3 words were. They said no one outside a completed initiation has ever heard them, and they intend to keep it that way. What they will tell me is the effect. They said it was not frightening in the moment. They said it was something closer to the feeling you got when a very large, very complex puzzle suddenly resolved. Every piece finding its correct position simultaneously, a clarity that was almost physical. They said they walked out of that building 2 hours later as a completed member. The driver was waiting outside. Same car, same quiet road. The return trip felt shorter than the drive in. They didn't know if that was because they were tired or because something about their perception of time had genuinely changed. They said the world looked identical to how it had looked when they drove in. Same dark road, same stars, same cold air against their face as they walked to the car. Everything exactly as they had left it. But they said something in how they understood all of it had shifted, not the world itself, their understanding of it, completely, permanently, in a way that had no sharp edge, no fear attached to it, just a settled, absolute clarity that had not been there before. They sat with it on the drive back, the whole hour, not speaking. The member driving said nothing either, as if they all understood that the quiet was appropriate, that some things did not benefit from being named right away. They said they have been a member ever since. They said they have never regretted joining. They said they have administered that same question and that same response to 7 new members over the years. 7 different people, different backgrounds, different reasons for joining, and every one of them had the same expression in that moment, the same stillness, the same particular shift in the eyes. They said they asked a long-standing member once what it meant, that everyone responded the same way. The member smiled. They said, "That's actually the whole answer, right there." They didn't elaborate. They didn't need to. They said what they imagined they had in that moment of clarity. That felt, they said, less like learning something new and more like remembering something they had always known, but had never, until that moment, been given permission to say out loud. Subscribe for more late-night stories, a new one every week. 4 societies. 4 people who went looking for connection, access, or community and found something they hadn't been told to expect. Elliot never went back to the 3rd room. Vera still attends her meetings. Leonard still doesn't say out loud what he thinks happened in that courtyard. And the 4th person is in a room somewhere tonight, asking the question, waiting for someone to say they don't know the answer, so the rest of the room can tell them. Some doors open both ways. Some were never meant to be found. And once you walk through the last kind, you never quite see the door from the same side again. Good night.